Thank you all for being here and making time. Um, I am pleased to be presenting our Church Giving Best Practices webinar. My name is Brandy Bivens. I'm joining from Nashville, Tennessee, where I'm the Chief Communications and Marketing Officer of GCFA. GCFA is the General Council on Finance and Administration, and our mission is to provide financial and administrative resources for the fulfillment of the mission of the United Methodist Church. So we want to provide you all tools who are on the front line helping to make disciples of Jesus Christ. So by way of introduction to best giving practices, our very first best practice is always to connect your giving to your mission. And by that, making sure that your donors understand the vital work and ministries that the dollars support at your church. And with that being said, churches today, we have to adapt to technological advancements and the changing donor behaviors to help us stay relevant and financially stable. But these adaptive technologies will also allow us to help budget and manage resources in a greater capacity than we have before with more analog giving. So just as you probably work to adapt your ministry to the changing needs of your community, we also need to look at our giving practices and say, what can we adapt? Or what can we keep the same, but also how do we add more options for our donors? Because incremental changes can make a big difference. And to that difference, let's look at the donations landscape. So there's really interesting statistics on recurring donations, and I could really nerd out about this for a while. But let's just look at a couple and think, in light of these statistics, how is that impacting my ministry, or how have you seen changes in your ministry? So almost 50% of the population gives to religious organizations, which is great news for us. More great news is that in the United States, at least, faith and religious services receive the most donations. It's around 30%. And even though inflation rose in 2022, we also saw church giving actually increasing. And that was the first time that we've seen that in a while. But between 1990 and 2015, the share of overall donations going to faith dropped off. So how can we change that? One of the ways that we can change that is through encouraging recurring donations. There's even more statistics that I feel like I always have those in my back pocket. But recurring donations specifically, recurring donors give twice the amount annually, and recurring online givers give 120% more than non-recurring givers. So anecdotally, you may think about if you yourself are a recurring donor, what happens when you go on vacation or if you go to see family, right? We all miss church occasionally, but what I don't want my church to miss out on Sunday is that vital offering. So this is when recurring donations really come in handy if you're able to set it up and have it automatically processed. And there's a couple of advantages to recurring donations. You can have stable and predictable income. You can start knowing your budget forecasting and your financial planning throughout the year. It also helps with enhanced donor engagement because if you're a recurring donor, that means you believe in where your donations are going. You believe in that ministry and the mission and what that church is doing. So they're really engaged donors, and it's just efficient, right? It can reduce administrative tasks related to donation processing especially if you've got it set it up on an ACH or an automatic bank process. That can sometimes actually save time for your administrative financial housekeepers. So, how do we encourage recurring donations? There's a couple of different ways. First, let's actually start with analog. Let's think about our check writers or the people who put cash in our collection plate. One of the ways that we can encourage recurring donations, if say someone doesn't want to leak a bank account, electronically, is through some of just good old fashioned paperwork, sending a letter and saying, we have this option available. We could do a bank draft so that it's taken care of. And that's for a lot of our population who doesn't want to give online. We've definitely seen some success with that. But there's other digital ways, and I think these digital ways are where we're seeing these increases, going back to that 120%, where we're seeing increases in recurring donations. And a lot of it does come from recurring electronic giving through websites. So you want to focus on an easy setup process. You can simplify the process of setting up donations on your church's website. That's through a lot of payment processor platforms, Venco, EasyTag, Tadley, and we'll get to those in just a moment. But there's some other things that you can do to help encourage recurring donations, including personal testimonies. Reach out to some of your committed donors to say, would you give a personal testimony to where I could put it on the website saying, my name is Andrew Jensen, and this is why I give. This is why I believe. Because friends buy what their friends buy. And so if they trust their friend to give recurring and electronically, that often helps open the gate a little bit for people. Another thing that we certainly found successful at my United Methodist Church is we sat and said, what were some of the barriers to electronic and or recurring donations? And one of the things that we found at our church is that offering plate moment is so very important. It's tradition, right? I grew up, like many of you, going to a church, and I would have my dollar that my mom gave me, and I would very much, the act of putting it in the collection plate was very important to me. And it was very important to my parents to make sure that I, growing up, had that connection. So when we were thinking about it at my church, we realized missing that offering collection plate moment was a barrier to having recurring donations electronically or online. So what we did was right when you walked in and you got your bulletin, we had a credenza, like a little desk, and we had these little cards. They were about the size of a Post-it, and it says, I give online. And they could take that so that when the collection plate is passed, they put something in the collection plate that they do give online. And so we're still fostering that collection plate generosity moment during service. So that might be something for you all to consider.
Brandy, I know we're saving the questions for the end, but we had a
Yes.
question, just a clarifying one that I think is important to get. When you talk about online givers, are you talking about all electronic giving, or are you talking just about people that maybe attend online worship and give online? Does that make sense?
Sure. So oftentimes these terms are interchangeable. But in my mind, I think of electronic giving as all electronic giving. So if I have set up a bank draft, I went to church. Well, my church emailed me a automatic bank draft form. I filled it out. So I never give through my website. I'm actually able to to have an automatic bank draft go directly to my church. And that can often help save payment processor fees of online giving, of someone that is, say, it might be under the weather, is attending your church service online when you're live streaming it, and there is a link to give on your website. That's online giving. So online giving is electronic giving, but other electronic giving, there may encompass things beyond online giving.
Awesome.
Okay. And thank you for that feedback, because we regularly give this presentation. And so that's something that I'll definitely take for next time to make sure that that's very clear. I appreciate that. So let's talk about benefits of electronic giving, right? Electronic giving is a yes, and it is a yes, I support you. And also, I support what you're doing, even if I'm not there, right? Going back to what we talked about earlier. So, electronic giving, whether it's online or via bank draft, it's very convenient for donors. With online giving, members can give anytime, anywhere, and that increases the likelihood of donations. So, I have a high school senior, and we've been doing some college visits so I can attend online and still make sure that I'm giving, even if I'm traveling. Um, Electronic donors often give more than cash donors. It's one of the statistics I didn't have in earlier, but in the United States, people generally don't carry over $50 in cash. So you can see increased donation amounts with electronic donors, both bank draft and online payment processing. And it also helps reduce the risk of handling your cash, right? Because if you're in ministry, that carrying those bank deposits on Monday when the bank opens, that's certainly something to think about, but also all the internal controls that GCFA offers to have churches follow, like making sure that parties, non-married parties count the dollars. So the less cash you have in your presence, the safer it can be as well. And that's both comforting for you and your staff as well as your donors. So let's talk about implementation strategies. Implementation strategies for online giving usually involve a payment processor or an online giving platform. Examples of those are Venko, PushPay, EasyTithe, Tadley. Now, there are some considerations when looking at partnering with those platforms. And GCFA does have a document that's linked at the end of this program that can kind of tell you what to watch out for, or what to consider when looking at those payment platforms. So one example of that might be some payment platforms charge a fee per transaction. So if Brandy gives $5 and Jensen gives $5, then there might be a 3% charge on those $10. Other platforms, they just charge you a monthly fee. So if you're processing $20,000 a month, it might just be a monthly fee and not a per transaction. So when you're looking at these platforms, be sure to also look at your donation history to say what really makes sense is for our ministry. Do we have a lot of individual transactions? Or do we just have a few people starting to use this? Because that may be a wise place you could save some ministry dollars when processing those payments. You also, in these implementation strategies, ensure your website has a user-friendly donation page. Ask someone, ask a friend, ask a church member to give you feedback. Was our website online donation, was it clear? Or if you have sent out a way that you could do an automatic bank draft, is it clear to the user those instructions? You also can promote your electronic giving through your bulletins, your newsletters, and during services. So don't let an opportunity go by to have a donor financially support you in your ministry, because you never know when your ministry work is going to connect with a person at that exact right time, right? Allow those God moments to exist. And always, always, always connect your giving to your mission. Update your donors regularly. Last month, you all gave 10% more, and that's going to allow us now to put that toward a swing set for our children's ministry. That's going to allow us to feed 10 more people on Wednesdays at our soup kitchen. So making sure that you're connecting your giving to your mission. And one of the ways you can both connect your giving to your mission, along with promoting electronic giving through church bulletins and newsletters, are through QR codes. Now, a QR code, it's that little thing that looks a little pixelated right next to the effectiveness of QR codes. If you have gone to a restaurant since the pandemic, you've likely encountered a QR code. And it's simply a way where someone doesn't have to type in First United Methodist Church /giving, right? They can open their screens and are connected right away to that website. Now, one of the things on QR codes, if you're using it, again, is to have a trusted friend or church member try to use that QR code, right? Use it on an Android, use it on a smartphone, and try to make sure that you can work on it on mobile, right? Not just desktop. It also provides ease of use for your donors, and it's really integrated with those mobile platforms that we talked about earlier, like Venko and EasyTad and Tadley. Now, something else I will say is, you know what is best for your church, and don't be afraid to experiment. Um, my husband is a little bit older than me, and he hates QR codes and refuses to use them. So he gets enough of it, he says, at a restaurant. So what we've done in our worship setting is we have both the QR code and the website, right? Because I don't want to miss out on that opportunity of, if someone is absolutely anti QR code, I still want them to know that we welcome their donation, and that there's other options available. So there are a few best practices for QR code implementation. The first one we've talked about, which is visible placement, um, but also instructional guides for donors. So that kind of goes back to, does it make sense when you're trying to use it? Are there instructions on how to use them? And then you can encourage your members to adopt QR code giving through targeted campaigns and demonstrations. So maybe leading, new year, new you, right? Maybe in January, start a campaign and try it for 3 months. We're gonna try QR codes, and then go back and look at your data. Are people adopting it? And what did that do in terms of our giving? Did you see an uptick or not? So also, don't be afraid to try these new electronic strategies. So moving from electronic giving, online giving, and QR codes, just wanted to say a quick word about encouraging pledges and legacy giving. So first, let's talk about pledges. What is a pledge? My church calls it an estimate of giving. And what we do is we have a letter. We certainly don't do it for our occasional visitors, but we do it for our consistent, recurring donors and our committed members. Um, we send them a letter, usually around November. And we tell them all of the things that we did this previous year. Here is all of the things that with your financial help, we were able to do. We showed some really great ministry work. And then we tell them, but this work can't be done without faithful generosity of members. And so we ask that if they feel comfortable, if they could um, either pledge or just help estimate their giving, because that allows us to build budgets and to know how much does our budget look like for Vacation Bible School, right? Because we've got those consistent donors who have said, I think my giving this year will look like this. Or, I'm in a little bit of a financial rough patch. And so they're able to say, I know it's going to be a little less, but I know our administrators would want to know that on the front end. So it just helps build those budgets and creates that long-term financial planning. Um, and then again, it re-engages your committed donors because you're connecting your pledging or your estimates of giving with your mission. These are the things we've accomplished, and then this is the way that we're looking forward to accomplishing it in the coming year. And I'll also note it doesn't have to be in November. My church happens to be on a calendar fiscal year. But if you're June to July, do what makes sense for your church. Um, and one last thing I did want to point out on pledges is there's a example of a giving estimate letter. It can be found at gcfa.org. But when you receive this presentation, you'll see it linked right here on this slide. So feel free to use that letter as a template for your ministry, and that's what it's there for. And just a quick note, I do want to say thank you to West End United Methodist Church for allowing their estimate of giving letter to be the basis for that resource. So, what strategies for promoting pledge giving? I've talked a little bit about it in terms of sending out those letters, asking for that estimates, but you can also organize pledge drives. Pledge drives can usually be successful both for just your general fund, so whatever administrative need comes up in your ministry, but pledge drives they often can be very successful if you're doing a capital campaign or a project-based campaign. So if you need to build a new swing set, larger playground, that might be a project where you could have a pledge drive that's separate from your general operating budget. You also can have testimonies from current pledgers. And if you have connected your pledge to a pledge drive to a certain project, don't be afraid to also include testimonies of recipients of that ministry. So my church has a large daycare, and not only do we have testimonies connected from committed donors, but also from those families who this daycare is vital and important, and it's a real ministry in their lives. So don't be afraid to connect testimonies from recipients as well. And then throughout a pledge drive, communication, communication, communication. We are 50% of the way there. This allows us to, maybe get our swing set. Maybe it's allowing us to get our swing set, but we're not quite there. on this part of the playground, or 50% of the way there has allowed us to now having that cushioning under the playground, but we still need the other 50% to get the equipment. Just be sure to communicate with your donors. It will always provide value, both communication for you as a ministry and as the recipient. So that's pledge giving. So let's move into legacy giving. What is legacy giving? It involves donors who include the church or your ministry in their estate planning. Um, it can provide substantial future funds for the church. So, this is really one of those moments where you're thinking about it as an investment in your ministry down the road. So there are ways to incorporate legacy giving. There's educational workshops where you can have sessions that can help educate members on the benefits and processes. You also can recognize your legacy donors, and that might be a wall. You can name a Sunday school classroom for a legacy donor. There's all sorts of manner of ways to recognize those donors. And that's really a fun area to be creative. Um, and then you can provide resources as well. So, materials and assistance, maybe just for people who are curious, who don't understand the process. And I will say, our friends at Discipleship Ministries in their Office of Stewardship, they have wonderful, wonderful materials on legacy giving. So I only briefly cover it here because it could truly be its own webinar, but they have a lot of really great information on legacy giving if you're curious. So I think that is the very brief portion of overview of best practices. So I think we have time to take some questions, and then I've got just a few more housekeeping things at the end. Jensen?
Absolutely. So we have a couple questions about the Zelle platform. So I'm familiar with that a little bit, and I've done a little bit more research while you've been presenting. So I'll give you a break here for a second, Brandy. So some people were asking about using the Zelle platform for churches. There are some perks because there's no transaction fees with Zelle, and it's instant transfers, but there's limiting information that they collect on donor giving. So this is like tax exempt or tax donation information. And there's also, it lacks recurring giving options, right? It's great for a one-time transfer, but it lacks those recurring options. I think it's also worth noting that when we look at electronic giving and the options that are out there, it's not so different than the tangible offering plate that we've had in the past. Because if you think about some people put checks in there and it has their name, and that's how the treasurer is able to track how much they donated throughout the year. Some people put cash in there, and that's not going to be trackable. Some people did the envelopes, right? And they would fill that out. And so while it's a minimal fee, the envelopes cost something, so there's an actual transaction fee, if you will. So the basic principles of online giving kind of resort back to what we're familiar with. It's just kind of a new way of looking at it. So that's the feedback on Zelle there.
Yes, and on that same note, I'm not as familiar with Zelle, but I am familiar with Venmo, and those services are very, very similar. And so I would encourage you to make sure that the tax implications, if you use those type of platforms, just want you to be sure to look at your tax implications there. The other problem with Venmo is, typically Venmo, you think you're gonna get around it, right? Of just like you could set it up as a personal account, rather than as a church account, and you're not paying some of those fees, right? Because 'Cause I'm just Venmoing a a friend who paid for pizza or something. But you're running into tax implications, and there's also some safety considerations of trying to send that through a personal account. So I'd just be very hesitant when using those platforms, and making sure that auditing purposes and transaction purposes, that you're just going through the official church bank accounts for however you're receiving electronic and online giving. Yeah.
Tammy asked if you had any tips on how to better understand the technology difficulties that some people might face, right? So some people might be more familiar with one platform or the other. Do you have a recommendation on how to get that feedback from the entire congregation?
Sure. So one of the ways that we have done it is surprisingly through QR codes that links to our website. So we were able to set up a feedback loop on our website, to just say, are you having trouble? Do you like this new way? Drop us a line. You can shoot us an email. You might be able to build a form on your website to say, help give us feedback on, did you like this new way? Um, but also ask, right? Feel free to say, "Hey, Brandy is the I was the communications chair for many years. She's going to be she's going to be in the narthex today for 30 minutes after service. If you like it or you hate it, her door's open. Come talk to her and tell her your thoughts." Because some of them, again, I think like a lot of things, you could certainly have a few people who are very vocal about not liking your platform, but that may be a vocal minority, but you just don't know till you ask.
Gotcha. Next question is, do you have any ideas, suggestions, or successful strategies for increasing income after the estimate of giving cards have been given? So if we get the
Yes,
pledge cards and we're lacking on the budget, how do we fill that gap?
sure. So, one of the things that you can consider with your pledge drive and your estimate of giving is, um, for our for our for our donors who have pledged or who have provided us an estimate of giving, we send them a quarterly giving statement, to say, we're so grateful for everything you've done. As a reminder, here's what your pledge is, here's where you are. But most importantly, connect it back to what they have given so far. What has that allowed your ministry to do? In what ways have that vital financial support allowed Jesus to work within your community and your connection?
So, we had a question about memorial giving and
Mhm.
some best practices around that. I would add that we did a webinar on designated giving, designated funds, and I think that that would be something worth looking at and considering when we talk about this. For instance, if someone makes a donation and that donation is designated for a specific purpose, but the church changes over time and that purpose goes away, whether it's a ministry or there's some legal ramifications of that. So that's kind of a down the rabbit hole part of that. But do you have other ideas on encouraging memorial giving?
Yes, absolutely. So I have seen a lot of churches do a memorial service. Um, so they pick one Sunday or one Wednesday and they have a memorial service, that includes information in the bulletin and on the website around, in loving memory, and how grateful we are for those gifts and honoring those memories. I've also seen memorial walls, where if especially you could change it out, but there are memorial walls where you can, you know, put the in memoriam. I cannot say that word. You can put it up on a wall, and then also you can debut your wall at a memorial service. Um, And so those are some ways. I've also seen really beautiful memorial services for the church as a whole throughout the year. They're really lovely in springtime, sort of as one of those first outdoor services, depending on where you live. Um, so it's not a service of lament, right? It's a service of hope. And then again, helping connect your mission with, by honoring Brandy's mother, we were able to fund XYZ. Yes. And we can, when we send this webinar out, what I can do is I'll create a list of the top 10 or 20 resources that I have found really helpful in the connection. So we can send out the legacy giving. I saw that in chat. We can send links to some of those legacy giving resources. We also have our specific resource on understanding e-giving and considerations when choosing vendors. So we can provide that resource list, and that may be helpful. And I'll look and see as well if there's any resources out there that I haven't seen lately on memorial giving. And then we can send those out along with our slides in this presentation.
Yeah, that's most of our questions now are asking
Okay.
for specifically asking for the resources we're talking about. So we'll make sure we include those in the follow-up email that go out, including links to the webinar I was mentioning.
Yeah. Absolutely. So let me share then just a couple of last minute items, then if that is the questions. So if you have questions today, you're thinking about it, you're absorbing it, our digital door is always open to you at GCFA. So our email is connectionalrelations@gcfa.org. That is our relational team that works throughout the connection to try to connect our resources with members and staff throughout throughout the world, really. And the last thing that I wanted you all to know about is I would love if you were encouraged to subscribe to our newsletter. So here's the perfect example of a QR code. So if you screenshot that, it would go to it, but it also I'm not taking my own advice because I should have put on the slide it's www.gcfa.org/subscribe. So I should have put that on there. We'll be sure to add that to the slide but before we send this out. But the Collaborator, that's our monthly newsletter, and it contains resources and news. So things like coming up, we have a webinar on the Fair Labor Standards Act from our HR department. And that webinar is going to be vital to you if you have salaried non-exempt employees. The U.S. Department of Labor is changing some rules on overtime pay. So that may affect some of the staff at your ministry. So that's one example of the type of information that's in that newsletter. But then we always have resources. So probably in the next couple of editions, you may see the resource list that I'll build for you all around here's resources throughout the connection on legacy giving, on pledge giving, on electronic giving. If it's something that we'll create, we'll go ahead and publish it in that newsletter. So highly encourage you to sign up there. And then I just want to say thank you all. I know that your time servicing your ministry and the United Methodist Church is valuable. And GCFA, we're so grateful that you made time to do this. There's also some financial resources that you may find of interest, and they're linked here when you get this slide deck. And we'll send you all of those materials in the coming days.
All right. Well, perfect. And just to recap, everyone, you're going to get the presentation. You're going to get a copy of the video. All of this will be sent in a follow-up email with those links. So thank you all so much for joining us. Thank you, Brandy, for sharing all of this with us. And we'll see you all next time.
Thank you.